Babysitters of Reddit, what seemingly normal parents had dark secrets. I nannied for this very rich family with 3 kids from the West Coast who would come to South Florida for summer vacation every year. The mother was in her 30s, clearly had her kids when she was young, and was very stereotypically hot. Blonde, thin, big boobs, perfect teeth. Her husband was a little older, salt and pepper, super handsome, very George Clooney-esque. Their kids were all blonde-haired, blue-eyed, so cute. They absolutely adored their parents. Dad would help the kids and mom settle in at the house and then fly back to Cali for work. I babysat 5 times a week, 6:30 p.m. to 2 a.m. Mom would get all dolled up, leave her wedding ring on the kitchen counter, and come home very late, clearly drunk. And sometimes brought men home with her that she introduced as her friends. She would often overpay me, which I never complained about, but I worried for the kids. Story 2. My daddy hits my mommy sometimes. For that one, I was still in high school. I told my mom what she said, and my mom went to the police station to report it. I like it when you're here, not the other lady. She's mean and she makes me sit in the closet. This little girl was referring to her dad's girlfriend. I told the dad about it and never saw the girlfriend around again. And for some comic relief, my older brother and I play swords in the bathroom. Daddy taught us how. Asked him to show me with his action figures what he meant, expecting the worst. And he says, "Look," and goes in his dad's closet and pulls out these giant foam swords. Woo! Thankfully, not all in the same house. Story 3. Somewhat wholesome story. I used to babysit for the kids down the street when I was in high school. One night, I went into the parents' bedroom to get something, I think a puzzle, and there was a book on the nightstand called How to Comfort Your Kids When You're Thinking of Divorce or something like that. The next time I was over, there was a book downstairs on the mom's desk that was the couple's therapist's guide to saving a failing relationship. It made me sad because the parents seemed really happy together whenever I saw them. I felt bad that they must have been going through a hard time behind the scenes. My parents had a pretty unhappy marriage, so I tried to be extra nice to the kids. I hoped they hadn't had to listen to their parents fighting. Anyway, this went on for a few months with no further indications of trouble. I felt like I knew this awful secret that the kids didn't know. One night I came over to babysit. The mom was in grad school and she had a class, and the same books were sitting on the counter. As the mom was leaving, she was like, "Oh, I can't forget the textbooks," and grabbed them off the counter. I actually didn't know what she was studying, so I asked what class she had. Turns out she was studying to be a couples and family therapist. The books I saw were her school books. In retrospect, that made complete sense because the titles were kind of academic, but I immediately assumed they were divorcing. About a decade later, they are still married, and the wife is a very successful couples and family therapist. Go figure. Story 4. I used to babysit for my next-door neighbor who had an 8-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy. I was 13 when I started babysitting for them, and I knew off the bat. The kids were an interesting duo, to say the least, and I have too many stories to tell from when I was watching them. We all went to school together, so when we got off the bus, we'd walk to their apartment and I'd watch them, made sure we got homework done, and make them the snack of the day. One day, we had a half day at school, and I think the mom forgot, because when we walked into the apartment, I heard one of the doors shut. At the time, we thought it was an intruder, so I grabbed the 5-Yo's baseball bat, told them to stay in the room, and I'd do some investigating. I opened the bathroom door, and there was the mom, half naked, with a guy that wasn't her husband. She gave me all the money in her wallet and her business card. She was a photographer, and told me to never speak of it again. I caught her cheating and made out with $400 and a $650 photo shoot package. Took pictures for all the upcoming holidays so I could keep giving gifts to my family. I babysat them for about 3 months after, before they moved away. Story 5. I never really babysat for anyone besides family, but I did dog sit for a woman and her husband for a while. She gave me a tour of the house the first time I went over there, and there was a room in the back of the house that was filled with sex toys. She sold them as a side hustle and wanted me to know they were there in case I was uncomfortable. They paid me well and left a great review on the site I was using. I wish they never moved. I loved their dogs. Story 6. I babysit 5 times a week. You'd be surprised at how many sex toys I see. A lot of them are just out in the open, like they forgot to hide them. I overnighted once and the guest bed had bondage straps. Parents totally forgot about that. That's not too surprising, but some of their kinks are. Probably the darkest was this 5-year-old girl I babysit. She was the victim of assault for a couple years by an aunt and uncle. No charges pressed or anything. Mom and dad just cut all contact with that side of the family. I live in a small town, so I see the aunt pretty often. It's sickening. They understandably have a ton of cameras set up in their house now and aren't gone for more than a couple hours. The child has a very weird bedtime routine, which is how I found out. Story 7. I was babysitting for my neighbors, and they were super nice people. 2 kids, very Pottery Barn people. They would always come home late with no cash to pay me, but they'd come by my house literally the next day with the cash, so I never minded. But I was always a little confused as to how they spent all their cash at dinner and a movie and somehow didn't plan to pay the sitter, and how they managed to stay out till 3 a.m. just doing dinner and a movie. And they were pretty wealthy, so it wasn't like a waiting till payday thing. Once before they left, when they were in the other room saying goodbye to the kids, I went to move the wife's purse and saw a really big roll of singles. I brushed it off, but then another time, their daughter had an allergic reaction, and I texted them a SOS. When I got a call back, I picked up and heard club music. It was a couple sittings after that. When I left through the back door and saw the husband in the garage, shaking glitter off their clothes, that I realized they were probably going to a strip club. When I went to college, they switched to using my sister as a sitter, and I sat down with her and explained where they went, and not to ask or act suspicious. They were good parents, and it's not like a problem. It was just super not the vibe they gave off, and I kind of found it hilarious. Story 8, not so much as dark, but really sad. I babysat for a typical upper-middle-class family. Dad worked. Mom was stay-at-home. The mother was always a little overprotective, like checking on their daughter the second they got home, but I didn't think much of it. One night, they came home and we talked a little. She mentioned how much she loved children and her daughter, so I asked her if they ever thought about having another. She completely broke down and explained that she had multiple miscarriages before and after her daughter, so they stopped trying. I felt really awful and really sad because it seems like she wanted another baby. Story 9. I babysat a lot when I was 13, 15. At the time, I lived in a small town. I was a very popular babysitter, as I also worked at the daycare center. Often I would have kids from 2 or 3 different families at once. I didn't care I got triple the pay for having 3 different groups of kids. I was recently told why I always had groups of kids like that. Turns out the small town had a swingers club, and I was the go-to babysitter for their different groups. Story 10. I'm not sure if this counts, but this is my secret between myself and my nephew. My sister was 23/24, and she was going through her divorce. She and her 3-year-old son came to live with us. I was in high school at the time and devoted all of my after-school time to him. He and I were close. We were so close I would be on the couch with him in my lap at 3 a.m. watching In the Night Garden for the billionth time. Still in my school uniform, but now smelling of regurgitated milk and doing math homework with my left arm. Meanwhile, my sister would be out partying and whatnot. One day, it was just my nephew and I. At the time, he was, I think, around 4. I was in my school uniform, getting ready to leave for school. He was helping me get ready by putting his favorite toys in my bag. As I was heading out, I told him that I loved him like usual, and he replied, "I love you too, Mummy." I was stunned, but I was already running late, so I brushed it off and went to school. After that, when we were alone, my nephew started calling me Mummy. He was genuine. I asked him, "What about Mummy?" And he tells me how she doesn't really love me, you love me, and Nanny loves me. I tried to encourage him to call me Auntie again, and he did when others were around. But when we were alone, he looked at me with his sweet little eyes and called me Mummy. He eventually says, "I wish you were my real Mummy." Tantrums become more common for him. He throws them when his mom is around and begins to avoid her hugs. Her hugs were only there to pose for selfies and to show off what a good parent she is. He would start crying and screaming and get sent to his room for misbehaving. My mom, Nanny, and my sister would go out and leave me in charge. I would then go to my nephew and give him a big ol' bear hug. I'm not the parent, and he isn't my child, but our secret was mutual. I wished he were my child, and he wished I was his mom. We had to keep our wishes secret because if my sister knew that I was ruining her image by taking all of the mother-son love, then hell would have broken loose. She was all about self-image, to the point she became a compulsive liar, and she also has some other mental problems. His teachers noticed our bond when he entered primary school, and his after-school babysitters knew about his other mom. My nephew is 10 now. I don't know if he remembers any of this, but the other day was my birthday, and for the very first time, he tried to earn money through chores to buy me a gift himself. It was a Squirtle amiibo. Story 11. I worked at a daycare center. To be clear, these parents did not seem very normal. Mom had fake-inflated Kardashian-sized boobs and butt, and was generally very conceited, like almost a stereotype of a person with a body that augmented. She stood out among the other parents who picked up their kids from the daycare after working 12-hour shifts, scrubbing floors, and doing other blue-collar labor. Large immigrant community. Dad was more down-to-earth, so it seemed. Younger brother, age 7, told me he was anxious one day. He tended to be a worrywart, so I wasn't surprised, but I asked him why. He says that his dad yells at his mom a lot because she gets drunk, goes out and parties with her friends, and then he has to go and pick her up, which leads to a lot of arguing. I told him that that's really sad, and that we would say a prayer for them. It was a Christian day. A week or so later, he excitedly told me that the prayer worked, and his parents weren't arguing anymore. While Mac does say that all things are possible through God, so jot that down, I was only tentatively optimistic about YB's revelation. Older brother, 8, was a completely different personality, a bully to the kids and adults, never had a positive thing to say. The things he seemed to like were his younger brother, Fortnite, and Roblox, like you do. Most of the school year, we had butted heads trying to get him to do homework, but towards the end of the year, his behavior changed. He would say he was too stupid to do homework and would try to hold his breath to try and take his own life, in his own words. This seems like a huge red flag, and he eventually broke down and said that his dad was abusive towards him and that his mom says she doesn't like being around him. While he was prone to lying, he was crying, something he never did, and his behavior was like nothing me and my coworkers had never seen. That was my first time calling CPS, and when the next school year started, those kids didn't come back. Story 12. I was babysitting for a local family who owned car dealerships. I answered the phone hello, as one does, and it was the father who didn't know his wife had hired a babysitter so she could go to an appointment. He started in with the stupidest sexy voice until he realized it wasn't wife. He hung up. Later, he was caught cheating. Story 13. I used to nanny for a family. At the interview, they seemed totally normal. Even the first day wasn't too terrible. I quickly realized that both parents were abusive. Mom had severe anger issues and was medicated for some condition related to it. Dad was a borderline sexual predator who constantly talked about how gross looking his wife was and how if she didn't stop being a git, he'd divorce her. Their kids were just as bad. One of them was also medicated for behavioral issues. I found out later that the reason they were hiring a nanny opposed to daycare was because their kids had been kicked out of the daycares in the area. Noped the duck out of that situation within a few months. Story 14. I nannied for a wealthy couple. She was a surgeon, he was an architect, and the husband had a study in the house that the wife joked about never being allowed in. Now, I'm a nosy ducker, and I was curious about why you wouldn't let someone in a study, ESP, since it looked like a fairly normal room. Big desk, walls covered in bookshelves, books of architecture everywhere. So one day, I just roamed around in there. I didn't really find anything, and I was kind of disappointed, but then I grabbed a book off one of the shelves. The thing had money pressed between its pages, about $500, if I had to guess. Picked up another book, found the same thing. I think I checked like 10 different books, and every single one had money hidden in it. Still not sure if the dude was just paranoid about banks, or if he was intentionally hiding money from his wife. Story 15. I was babysitting at my neighbor's house. They were a young couple, early 30s, with 2 kids, age 5 and 8. I was 16 at the time, and the first questions they asked me was if I had a boyfriend, and if I was a virgin because they didn't want me seeing boys while babysitting. I think part of the reason why they asked this is because they were pretty wild themselves and probably did crazy stuff when they were younger and babysitting. When they found out I smoked, they always left some cigarettes for me. They always told me that they'd be home around 12 or 1, but most of the times I would fall asleep and they would stumble home completely drunk around 3 in the night. They'd give me way too much money as an excuse, which I obviously didn't mind. After a while, the dad started messaging me online. First just asking innocent questions, but after a while they became more sexual in nature. I told him I didn't feel comfortable with that, so he stopped. They broke up a while later, and the mom started throwing wild parties at their home. I randomly walked by with a friend of mine once, and she invited us in and gave us a beer. My friend and I felt pretty cool. Here we were at a grown-up party, having beers, until the mom came up to us to offer us some substances. We were shocked and declined, and left the party quickly after that. I told my parents a couple of years later about all this, after the mom and kids moved, and they were outraged, apparently. They always acted like they were very respectable. Story 16. I used to babysit when I was around 13, 14-ish. My neighbors and 3 kids, ages 4, 7, and 11. The house was really nice, always clean and tidy. One time they asked me to babysit for a couple hours. Okay, no big deal. They paid me $6 an hour. When I got there, they made the kids shake my hand and say, "Thank you for babysitting us." I thought it was weird, but it was whatever. The parents left and the kids wanted those dinosaur chicken nuggets, so I made them some. As they were eating, the 7-year-old asked for a toy. She said it was in her parents' dresser. I didn't want to snoop around, but if she wanted the toy, I get it for her. I went into the parents' room and found the dresser. I opened the first one, and all I see are stacks of cash. Okay, weird, but not my business. I went back out to ask the girl what dresser drawer it was in. She goes over and literally points at the second drawer and said, "Oh, don't open that one. It has bags of sugar in it." That's what I hear mommy say. I was like, "Oh, okay then." She grabs her toy from the 4th drawer and runs off. I did take a peek in the drawer, and sure enough, under the socks were bags of substances. I was shocked, but I didn't say anything. I put everything back where it was and left the room. When the parents got back, I took the cash and left. Never babysat there again. Story 17. I am a dude and have had dogs for a large portion of my life. I live somewhere pretty close to a small park with a playground, and I used to walk and play with my dog there frequently, so I would meet this woman who had an adorable daughter quite often. Both she and her daughter liked my dog, so it would often end up with my dog and her daughter playing for a bit while me and the mother were talking about stuff. I am quite laid back and chill, so after talking for some time, she asked if I would like to care for her daughter sometime if she was going to be busy, as she trusted me. As I liked her daughter, I didn't mind. We ended up just playing Mario Kart and chilling on the sofa while I told her stories until she had to go to bed. The mother came home pretty drunk on a few occasions, and we ended up sleeping together a few times. What she hadn't told me about was that she had a husband that was working offshore. The kind of work where he would be gone for weeks at a time with no cell reception. Something I kind of found out when I passed her house while walking my dog, seeing a man working in the garage and the garden several days in a row. I asked the woman the next time I met her if she had met someone new as I saw some guy at her home. Her face changed immediately and she poured it quietly all out to me. She was miserable with her husband because he was an alcoholic and was rarely at home cause of work, where he always worked overtime. She had fallen for me and thought that I was one of the sweetest men she had ever met, and she would rather be with me than with him. So her nice house, expensive car, and all sorts of gadgets were paid by her husband, while I, as a lowly middle-range wage man, had sex with his wife and bonding with his daughter while he was gone. I felt so bad about it, so I told her that we should stay as friends, but that I would keep her secret if she promised to care as well as she could for her daughter. And if crap hits the fan, I would look after her daughter. It's been over 1 year now, and we still occasionally talk, but I still feel pretty bad about it all. I just hope the daughter doesn't know. Story 18. A family member of mine was a babysitter in the 70s. A couple who lived nearby asked her to babysit their baby a few times. I didn't get the sense that she knew them well. Every time she'd go, they said the baby was sleeping and not to disturb the baby by checking on it. The baby never cried. The parents would come home and relieve her. She never saw or heard a baby. At the time, I don't think my family member thought much of it, but has told me this story several times because it keeps nagging at her. How could a baby be asleep for the entire time she was there? Every time. No noises. Nothing. Today, she thinks there must not have been a baby, but has no idea why they'd hire her. Story 19. When I was 13, 14-ish, I used to babysit 2 kids while their parents went to Amway functions. One night, for whatever reason, I looked behind the couch and saw a bunch of magazines. I collected them, thinking they'd been dropped behind there by accident by the kids I babysat. It was a huge stash of adult magazines, and I had to quickly re-hide them before the kids saw them. I was curious, naturally, but I told the mom when she drove me home. I don't recall if she said anything or not, but I stopped babysitting her kids shortly after that because I moved away. Story 20. I babysat for the local policeman when I was a teenager. He always came home very drunk and in a weird mood, and one time brought out a homemade Ouija board and persuaded me to take part with his buddies. Always paid me really well. Story 21. I babysat for them a few times. 3 kids, 1 eldest son, a pair of twins, and a pair of doting parents. One of the twins was transgender. She was lovely, bubbly, and a joy to be around. It was also really nice that the parents were super supportive of her. Included in their library were a few books on trans-related issues, including that I Am Jazz book. It wasn't a hands-on job. They mostly liked to watch whatever kids' movie DVD, and I would go on my laptop and do college work. Sometimes the twin would ask me to help be pretty, and I would show her how to braid hair and crap like that. The other twin, who was a CIS boy, sometimes got involved, but the eldest never did. I figured it was early 13-year-old dude trying to be cool thing that everyone goes through and just let him be. One day the parents came home as we were finishing doing our nails. The twins ran up to show the parents their nail colors, and I was getting my payment when the eldest spoke up and said, "You shouldn't pay her because she's turning the other one into a git as well." It was like time froze, and everyone's mouths just dropped. I was hurried out of the house while I heard the little girl ask, "What's git?" I wasn't asked over to babysit again. At first, I thought it was because they thought I taught him that word, but I quickly heard village gossip that the eldest son was expelled from school for brandishing disrespectful iconography, and they had to move somewhere else to put him in a different school. It's been like 10 years now, and I actually recently looked them up. Both twins are doing fine. He's training to be a pilot, and she's in the catering business and is excited to start the hormone treatment. The eldest, on the other hand, is like poster boy supremacist. Nazi salute and everything. I don't get it. Like the narrative of him not getting enough attention or getting picked on because of his sister doesn't even fit, because he was really high up on the soccer team, and his parents and classmates loved him. He just fell into this crafty hate spiral that he yet to come out of. I hope he snaps out of it one day, but I hope at least he's leaving his sister alone. No one deserves to be called that word. Story 22. I babysat 3 young boys during my senior year of high school. Their parents were separated and having marriage issues, but went on weekly date nights to work on their marriage as well as attend counseling. What I didn't know was that the husband was abusing the wife. One day, she filed a restraining order against him, and this made him go into a rage. He broke into her apartment and killed her and then take his own life, all while the boys were home. They were able to escape out the garage. Story 23. So I'm a teenager, 16, loving life. Anyways, I started babysitting when I was 13. I loved the job so much, especially the first family I ever babysat for. It was a nice, seemingly average family, 2 well-behaved girls and a baby boy. The parents went out a lot, and I thought nothing of it. They always said they went out on dates a lot. I went with it because who wouldn't? Anyways, one Friday night, the kids passed out early, around 7:30 or so, as it was a long day at preschool and daycare and what have you. I went to get something to eat for myself like the parents usually let me do, but there didn't seem to be anything in the fridge. I decided to look around the house. As the parents said, they left me $15 for takeout, if I wanted it. But slight problem. I didn't know where it was, so I went on an adventure down to their room to check the nightstands. As they said, it was on some sort of nightstand, so it was now a game of, is it in the master or one of the two guest rooms? Anyways, I walked into the master and noticed the room was much messier than any other place in the home. Even the kids' rooms were cleaner than the parents' room. There were bags, boxes, and an assortment of miscellaneous items. Something that seemed off to me was the number of expensive items. This family wasn't poor, but they weren't rich either. So when I saw tons of jewelry that seemed strikingly expensive was kind of off-putting. Mind you, the father was a professor and the mother a secretary. I just shrugged it off because I found the pizza and I was a hungry, growing teenage boy. So I left the room and just went on with the night. Skip later to about 4 or 5 months later, and I find out that the family found out the information of other families I worked for. They legit followed me places. Mind you, I was 14 at the time, and they followed me to the homes of other families and figured out the names and ages of all the adults and children then they stole from them. They legit gained the trust of other families I worked for, getting them to invite them over for dinner or something, and they stole from them. The father was arrested, the mother put on probation, and the kids taken away for a while. I moved out of state. I never got to know what happened to those families, especially the kids of that family. Story 24. Let me just say first off, that although these people had interesting magazines and props, I never saw any evidence of anything illegal. I think I was around 15 when I started babysitting for a family that lived down the street from my parents. It would have been around 1977. There were 2 boys who were 4 years apart. They fought like cats and dogs, but basically normal sibling rivalry. The parents were desperate to find a good sitter, until they figured out I could babysit. They didn't go out much, unless one of the grandparents watched them, and both had issues with their parents, so they didn't want to do that too often. Since I wasn't 16 when I first started watching them, the mom made a big deal of not paying me much, because she could get away with it. I think at first they paid me $1.75 per hour, and then when I turned 16, I got $2. Woo-hoo. The first few times I sat for them, I was really excited because they had cable and color TV. We didn't. They also had good snacks. The kids went to bed easily, and that left me a few hours to explore. I found their adult magazines and actually got a little worked up reading through them, but was careful not to move them out of place. I only lived a block away, but at some point, they decided that they didn't want to have to take me home or have me walk, which I would have done in a heartbeat and without any issues, since I lived in a very small town. Instead, they had me lock the door after they left. Then they'd let themselves in, and I'd sleep on the couch until I woke up in the morning and could walk home. Problem was, they'd come home drunk and randy as all get out. What most people do when they come home from a party, you know? Guess what? I wasn't asleep and heard the whole thing. After the first time, I was dreadfully embarrassed and felt like I couldn't look them in the eye. But I got over it. I never slept over there, so I was always exhausted in the morning, and I'd go home and crash for several hours. So I guess it was more my dark secret than theirs. Story 25. I was a nanny for years for this family. I stopped being their nanny because I moved states away. Anyway, mom was in and out of mental hospitals, tried hurting herself several times, barely takes care of the kids, but rants and raves on Facebook on how perfect she is as a mom. Dad takes care of them the most while she stays out late with friends. Doesn't need a nanny, but chooses to have one so she can go tanning, shop, get her nails done, hang with friends, etc. When I was their nanny, they saw me more than their mom. There were days when their dad would get stuck at work, so I would have to work extra late because mom had plans. So I'd work 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. or later sometimes. There was a few times I would have to meet her at one of the kids' appointments and drop the kid off, but wait for it to be over with so I could take him or her with me. One time, one of the kids got really sick at school and the mom called me saying she can't get them because she has a nail appointment. This was on an off day. One of the girls had a hard time at school for a while because she'd cry saying how much she wanted her mom. I drove them to and from school, packed lunches, if dad didn't, make breakfast, homework help, attend all school programs, dad was usually there, laundry, etc. Oh, and she got a puppy without saying anything to me? Guess who had to take care of him the most? That's right, me. Also, the kids, especially the youngest, likes to hit mom and sisters. Mom just says, okay, time out, but doesn't do anything. When the kids whine, they get whatever. Usually a bunch of candy. It's a mess. Her Facebook friends would be surprised. She quit her amazing $100,000 a year job to stay home, but still wanted me around so she could lie gag. I don't know how I stayed for years. It was mentally draining. I got married about 9 months after starting my nanny job with them, and some nights I would only see my husband for a little bit. It sucked. To this day, I refuse to work a job that takes too much time away from my house, dog, and hubby. I now work from home as a teacher, and it's less stressful. Yes, they have a new nanny since I moved, even though they definitely don't need one. Story 26. Ooh, I have 2. I was about 12 when I took over my sister's friend babysitter job. 4 kids, 2 girls, and 2 boys. The dad was freaking scary looking. Long beard, fat belly, booming voice. Mother was short, very friendly, and soft-spoken. I walked into house and had to wrinkle my nose at the smell, which I later found out it was because he was growing a marijuana plant in his closet. I didn't say anything because he's probably kill me, and he let my boyfriend come over while I was babysitting. My second story is so much worse. She was a good friend who hardly ever let me in her house. When she did trust me, we would sit in just her kitchen. Very odd. Well, her and the new boyfriend, who was an OTR truck driver, left for 2 days one night and asked if I'd watch her 2 boys. Boy, where do I start? Kitchen. Sinks were overflowing with dirty dishes. First floor bathroom had a leaky pipe, and she had a piece of wood laid out to get to toilet. Oh, and puppy crap in tub. Nothing wrong with living room, but I'm watching TV. Boys were upstairs playing, and I hear this loud crash. I book it upstairs to find the boys' room, sleeping on just mattresses, no sheets or pillows. They had every toy they owned in middle of floor, so they could climb it to break light bulb. Yeah, that was a fun mess to clean up with 2 boys that don't listen. Bedtime comes around and I tell the boys to brush their teeth. There's no toothbrushes. Upstairs tub also had puppy poop in it. 3 days later, my friend still has not showed up back home, so I load kids into my car and drive to my parents' house so I can shower. My mom tells me that we smell to high heaven. I take boys back home to wash them out of kitchen sink, and I find out there's no hot water in the house either. I heated water on stove and sponge-bathed boys from kitchen sink. I now know I should have called CPS, but I was 17 and more worried about her hating me. Stupid, I know. But last I heard, she ended up with a 3rd child, then left her boyfriend for his cousin. Kids are all currently grown up and moved out, and mom is still trying to find happiness. Story 27. Work in an elementary school. A lot of horrifying, unexpected stuff tends to come up. I handle any behavioral calls, so tend to have a lot of contact with kids who are having trouble self-regulating in school. Sometimes these kids genuinely have a hard time, but often they can't regulate because they're in hyperdrive with what's going on at home. I had a mom tell me in detail the sex life between her and her ex. Another parent was arrested for substances trafficking and went to jail for 3 years a week after he'd attended parent-teacher conferences. Another parent got into a fight in the lobby, and 911 had to be called. Story 28. One family. I still don't know what was up with them. It's like they were squatting in a model home or something. It was a fully furnished house that looked to be straight out of Better Homes and Gardens magazine, but there was nothing in the drawers, fridge, or cabinets. No toiletries in the bathroom except for toilet paper, no food or silverware in the kitchen, no clothes in the closets or in the kids' drawers, and no toys. The lady just told me to order food for the kids, and they watched TV. It was weird. Story 29. I was driven home from a babysitting job by the father, and he pulled down a dark country road and attempted to molest me. I fled. I was 14 and had no clue where on earth I was. I kept running, reached a gate and leapt over it. He had caught up at this point and grabbed me by the wrist. I managed to convince him that if he let go, I'd never tell anyone and I'd walk back to the car with him. He let go, thick, and I fled. I'd been working for my mom earlier that day and was wearing a tight pencil skirt and heels. It wasn't the easiest garb to run in, but I ran and saw a light in the distance. It was a large, posh farmhouse, and I rammed on the patio doors like my life depended. It may have. And an old, very old woman answered. Gray, crimpling housecoat, frail. I screamed to let me in. There was a man chasing me, and she did. I'm eternally grateful. I mean, I'd advise my gran to never let random teenagers in the middle of the night, so she took a risk, and luckily it was okay. She let me call my parents. The way they took care of their kids wasn't great, but at 14, what did I know, really? I dread to think what he may have done if not for that woman. My family sent her a thank you card and chocolates. But how could that ever be enough? Story 30. My aunt was a babysitter during the early 1980s for their next-door neighbor. It was a man, his wife, their 2 kids, and his mother. We grew up in New Jersey in a small, quaint town. Everybody knew their neighbors. The area was surrounded by woods. A nice place. The family was from Italy. The kids were young, 6 or 7, never went to school, homeschooled, and were incredibly smart, played the piano, always well-behaved, etc. Although she and I are not on speaking terms, we did talk about it years ago, and she recalled they were normal, healthy, average, and extremely pleasant. Fast forward, the man of the house was one of the defendants from the Pizza Connection, a mafia conspiracy that involved $1.6 billion worth of substances between the Sicilians and the Bonanno crime family. It was in the news for a very long time because it was the longest federal jury trial in the history of ever. Still is, I think. It was like 25 defendants all at once. The Donnie Brasco undercover operation and the death of Carmine Galante had a lot to do with the feds learning about what they've been up to for the last 10 years. Some people mention powder, but it was all about something harder. The man of the house and my grandfather were kind of friends. He told him he was a cheese importer and brought him cheese. In reality, he owned a pizzeria as a front for moving substances. My grandfather knew nothing about what he really did, despite being 100% Italian. Just before the sweeping arrests in who knows how many states and countries, the FBI was in our backyard, and my childhood dog, a Doberman, would bark at them. The family, including the kids, all disappeared around that time. He was caught and sentenced to 20 years. Story 31. Well, on the flip side, we normally hire a babysitter so that we can responsibly head out to overnight group sex and couples dates. Not too dark, but a fun secret. Story 32. I used to nanny for this lady who was recently divorced and had one 9-year-old son. She shared custody with the father, and all was good, except things didn't work out. But I'd meet the kid after school and help him do his how. His mom was a big lawyer in NI and was very successful. I always wondered why the parents got divorced. BC, she was a type of dominant personality, and he was mute subtle. Then one day, she asked me to look for something which was under some bed, and in the process, I found her toy stash. She was also dating a neighbor at the time. Seems she liked to be a dominatrix. One day I was bringing her mail in, and there was a flyer for some swinger party club. Guess she frequented often. Then she left her PC on an email with her friend talking about she found a new person with good weed. You never know who does what. She was a lovely lady who you'd never suspect, and she was in a highly successful position. I never did anything about it or told anyone before now. Story 33. I was a nanny for a young boy with additional needs. Let's call the parents John and Lisa. John worked for Lisa's parents as they owned a painting company. This company had the family surname as its name. One day, I noticed John was home from work early in the painting van, but it had his surname as the company name on the van, not Lisa's parents' surname. I thought it was a funny coincidence that he and Lisa had the same surname, and so I pointed this out. He froze up and looked a little awkward and said, "Oh, that's because Lisa and I are first cousins. They shared the same paternal grandparents and therefore the same surname. They had been together since they were young teenagers. I'm not actually sure if this is legal or not, but it's certainly frowned up here." Story 34. I babysat for a family with 3 wonderful kids. I genuinely did not like to babysit, but these kids were different. They were fun and nice and generally well-behaved. We had a standing babysitting night every Saturday. On a couple occasions, I would call the night before if I was sick or couldn't come for whatever reason. When I called, the mom answered and said she understood. She sounded loopy. I didn't really know for sure what drunk sounded like, but that's what I thought was happening. The next night, she would call to see why I was late and if I was still coming. She told her kids and husband that I flaked, but she confirmed my suspicions that she was blackout, drunk. After a couple times of this happening, they stopped asking me to babysit. I didn't want to confront her about it. I missed her kids a lot, and every time I passed by the house, multiple times a day, I hoped that the kids were well. I found out later that the parents were a lot worse than I knew. Drinking, partying, leaving the kids alone a lot. When I told my mom years later about the phone calls, she wasn't remotely surprised. Story 35. This was most likely a red flag, but I didn't and still don't know what to do about it, but here it is. When I was about 14, I had done some gardening for this old lady for a few years, and the neighbors must have watched me do it and thought I was reliable or something, and asked me over the fence if I could babysit their 2 grandkids who I had never met before. I had to take my friend with me, though, as it was overnight, and we had never done it before. It all went well. They were rambunctious, but went to bed quite easily. I had to sit next to the youngest one because he was a little scared. About 7 months later, I was asked again. My friend was busy, so I went by myself, and they were meant to come back and walk me home at about 1 a.m. The older one, 7, kept trying to touch my chest, and the youngest one kept trying to cuddle against me really weird while we were watching The Mask. After they brushed their teeth, they showed me a drawing of me and them together with "I love you" written across the top. A bit weird, but okay, it's probably normal. Then as I was putting them to bed, the oldest one pulled down his pants and showed me his penis and bragged about how big it was. I turned around, covered my eyes, told him to put it away, closed the door, and proceeded to freak out the rest of the time about being a child molester. They came home from drinking, and the mom walked me home, and she didn't sound a bit worried about it. Found out the next day that they literally just went back out drinking again and left the kids by themselves all night. Story 36. I wasn't a babysitter per se, but my childhood best friend had a very odd family. They would all get naked and hang out around the house, which was adorned with fetishes and carved statues from Aruba and Jamaica. Story 37. I looked after the neighbor's kid when I was young. They seemed normal enough when they moved in. Kid's parents were always away at work, but her grandmother lived with them and worked from home, so she was always there. The longer they lived there, the clearer it became that I was the only one looking after this kid. They weren't feeding her or paying any sort of attention to her, and Grandma didn't work from home so much as play computer solitaire all day. Their dogs pissed and crap all over the carpets, and they just left it. They let the dogs wander outside unattended, and eventually one got hit by a bus. My mom took her to the vet, and she recovered. They let her wander again, now mostly blind and crippled. Eventually, she wandered off and didn't come back. They never looked for her. Eventually, they moved. They tried to take the appliances with them, ripped the stove, cupboards, toilets, dishwasher, etc. out of the walls and tried to drag them out to their truck. Realtor caught them, and there was a big fuss about it. These things were there when they moved in, and it's been more than a decade, and I still worry about that kid. Story 38. A couple of months ago, I started to babysit for some pocket money. A married couple wanted me to babysit their children of 4 ages 3, 11 because they were going out on a date night. Seemed like a normal family. The kids were pretty chilled, no crying, fighting ECT. I was playing snakes and ladders with the kids, and one of EK wanted some crayons so he could draw. I asked him where the crayons were. He told me it was in the living room coffee table drawer. Okay then. I went to go get them from the drawer and came back to the EK and gave him the crayons. Then continued playing with the other kids. Then he came to me and gave me a drawing. Apparently it was EP and the EK's doing family time. He'd drawn his family doing witchcraft rituals and everything was in red color. Up. What were you guys doing in this picture? Eck. Mommy and Daddy wanted to talk to the man. Up. Who's the man? Eck, the man who I see in my bedroom while going to sleep. Then he runs off, giggling. Finally, the parents come home from their date night. I got my money and I left. As I was leaving, one of the EP called for my name. Ep, hey, up, yes? Ep, there was no issues between the kids and you, right? Said with a very unnatural smile. Up, no, not at all. Ep slams door. After that, I stopped babysitting. This was probably one of the most creepiest crap I've experienced. Story 39. Took me a while to realize one of my little people's moms was hurting him. He was a perfectly normal little rambunctious 4-year-old, so the bruises didn't bother me. Then he started acting out, hitting me, insulting me, expressing himself in other ways by pooping and peeing in inappropriate places. I did my research, talked to a child psychologist and a pediatrician, expressed to them my fears. They both encouraged and assisted me in calling CPS. The child was taken away, placed with his loving father and stepmother, who had been alienated by the mom. The mom was seemingly a normal woman, cosmetologist with a huge client base, used to cut my hair for free, always did a good job. Everyone girl wanted her to do their homecoming/prom/military ball, wedding hair, and makeup. She was a well-respected woman in town, had the ear of everyone from the school board to town hall. In short, she was everyone's friend. Everyone wanted her to be on their volunteer committee, bake sale. I called CPS and her entire image unraveled within a 48-hour period. It was further sullied when the courts revealed she had 2 other children by different men who had been removed from her custody, and she had been permanently banned from seeing them due to gross negligence and abuse. She's currently serving a dime sentence at a North Carolina's women's facility. Story 40. I was babysitting a 2YO and a 5YO, both male. The kids were fine, but the parents acted suspicious whenever I entered their room. They had cameras everywhere and crap. Story 41. I was a live-in nanny for a local pediatrician's family. Stayed with them for around 6 months. The dad moved overseas before his family to make sure everything was settled when they came. So basically, I was the second parent in the home while he was gone. During that time, I grew incredibly close to the mom in a love-hate way. She opened up about how she had an emotional affair with a mutual friend of hers and her husband's. She would show me the conversation, countless "you're all I wanted" type of messages. I remember asking about how she can do this while loving her husband. She replied, "I don't love him." In hindsight, I was going through my own relationship drama, so it seemed like a toxic bonding moment. My rose-colored glasses fell off when she admitted she flew across the country to go to a resort with him, all while telling her husband she was on a work trip. For reference, she had 2 toddler twins and a boy entering junior high. Pretty certain her oldest kid knew what was going on. She justified her spending a weekend with him by saying they never had sex, so it wasn't that bad. Story 42. I never babysat, but my friend did, and the kids were asking to have beer. When she said no, they were like, "But Dad gives it to us?" She was confused, so she called the mom. The mom was confused, and she asked the dad. I think the dad confessed, and I don't know what's happened after that, but they probably filed for divorce. Story 43. Oh boy. Now is my time. In the early 90s, I used to watch the kids across the street. They were like 6 and 9. Sometimes the parents would go out together for the evening. Sometimes the mom would be out and the dad would call asking if I could watch them because he had work or a golf game. At some point, the kids went to bed and I figured, hey, this guy seems like the kind of person who would have adult films. So I started snooping. Eventually, I found some magazines hidden in one of his drawers. Nothing too weird, but this was before I had the internet. Then I noticed something else. There used to be these weekly newspapers that you could pick up for 50 cents that mostly just had ads for strip climbs and 900 numbers, but also classified for escorts. He had one of these, but with lots of numbers circled. This sort of blew my mind as a pretty religious young teen. Then I noticed a manila envelope under that. Inside was the proverbial binder of women. Basically 20 full bios of different women with pictures, the things they will and won't do, and prices. I had no idea this is how things happen or who would be so organized in providing options. So yeah, Babysitting while the man of the house was likely going out for paid sex. Story 44. Not a babysitter, but I used to be a live-in nanny. There were 3 children, aged 7, 10, and 13, 2 boys and 1 girl. The mom was single and had recently divorced her husband. I had met the husband a couple of times. He was a successful businessman and seemed nice enough, but I always got a weird vibe from him. About a month after I had started living there, the mom confided in me about why she left him. He was addicted to adult film. I didn't think anything of it. She really didn't like adult film. So I thought maybe he watched it a couple of times and she confronted him about it, and it ended badly. That was when she got into detail about it. The adult film he watched, which she found on his computer when he was at work one day. The girls in the film were barely legal and flat-chested. He didn't watch it just a couple of times a week. He watched it all the time, even when he was looking after his children, with them in the room. Convinced he was a pedo and divorced him. At the time, I was 17 and felt even more uncomfortable being around him. He would always stare at me and try and talk to me in a weird way. I moved out a few months later. To this day, I don't know if he was a pedo, but there was definitely something wrong with him. Story 45. Seemingly a happy family, but the child had a lot of odd behaviors. The most obvious one was she'd cry if you laughed in front of her. Her mom told me the 4-year-old child would assume you were laughing at her. One time I group babysat at a neighbor's house with this child, and when the father came to pick the child up, the neighbor's dog went ballistic and tried to bite him. Shortly after it came out that the dad was abusing the daughter. Story 46. I had a regular weekly babysitting gig for 3 kids. The older 2, maybe 10 and 6, were the mums, and the toddler was from the newish relationship of the couple I was sitting for, a seemingly well-adjusted, normal middle-class family. Crucially, this was before mobile phones. So one night I'm sitting there plowing through Rocky Road ice cream and watching Doogie Howser. I was 15 when the phone rings. It's the grandmother who and for a bit, and then tells me that she's calling because the ex-husband, dad of the older 2 kids, had contacted her, was having some sort of freak out and said he was coming to find and kill the kids. But it's okay as he doesn't know their new location. What the heck? I basically sat there, terrified for the next couple of hours. No idea why she thought it was appropriate to tell me this instead of, say, calling the police. Turns out they were in hiding from a crazy, abusive ex. Mother was very apologetic, but I don't really remember the specifics of what happened afterwards. I continued to sit for them too. Also, sat for another family where the mom used me as her personal therapist on the drive home. People tend to tell me personal stuff. I must have a certain empathetic face or something. Marriage issues, you name it. My maths tutor did the same thing. Definitely not a therapist now. Story 47. I nannied for a long time for a single mom of 2 kids. She never really spoke about why she was single, but I later found out through her kids that their dad had been cheating on their mom for a long time while they were still married. Explained a lot because the kids had some issues that you could see right off the bat. Felt sorry for the mom because she was a bit crazy. Not really super dark, but still sad. I also regularly babysat for a family in my neighborhood who were Mormons. On the surface, they seemed like a super by-the-book, typical nuclear family, very religious and soft-spoken. One day, while nannying, I was upstairs helping the youngest pick up his toys and noticed a random variety of books on the shelf. I looked through some of the titles, and among them were things like Overcoming Adult Films Addiction and a plethora of addiction self-help books. I have no idea which one of the parents they belong to, maybe both, but I just found it really strange. You never actually know anyone. Story 48. I babysat for everyone in my neighborhood growing up. But one of the kids had really nice parents. They always paid me more than I thought I deserved for playing a few hours of video games while the kids slept. I never got a weird vibe, and they never made me uncomfortable, so I just figured this was how people reacted when they had money to spare. The only rule that I thought was somewhat strange was, don't go into the basement. Not even their kid could go down there. I never questioned it though, because as odd as it was, everyone has their quirky rules, and who was I to argue? I was a teenager making loads of pocket money for basically doing nothing. We eventually moved to a new neighborhood about the time I started my junior year of high school, and I never babysat for them again. But a few years after I graduated high school, I found out they'd been arrested for cooking and using meth in that house. I guess I'll never know for sure if that is what they didn't want me to see down there, but it's the most logical explanation I can think of. I still have so many unanswered questions, though. Me. Story 49. My sister, age 14 in 1982, was babysitting for a family down the street. One of the kids threw up, and my mom ended up over there. My mom called the parents, pre-cell phones, and couldn't find some cleaning supplies since the garage was locked. The parents rushed home, everything got sorted, nothing really unusual. A few weeks later, that family got raided by the FBI. They had planted some bombs in a refinery in Texas and had a small arsenal in that locked garage. On Sept. 1982, the Cedar Bayou plant received a letter from an anonymous person that 10 bombs had been hidden within the plant. The sender of the letter threatened to detonate the bombs unless Gulf Oil paid $15 million. Gulf Oil shut down the Cedar Bayou plant after determining the letter was a legitimate threat. A search of the Cedar Bayou plant located 5 sophisticated bombs in metal casings. A federal and multi-state investigation led to the arrest of 4 people: John Marvin McBride, his common-law wife, Jill Renee Bird, Michael Allenworth, and Theodore D. McKinney, all of Durango, Colorado. Charges against Jill Renee Bird were dropped in exchange for her husband's cooperation. Story 50. I was not a babysitter, but I worked at a kid's place for a really long time. We had birthday parties where other parents could just drop off their children, leaving the only adults, usually being birthday kids' parents. I was hosting a party for about 15 children, all around the age 7, 9. They were sitting at multiple tables, doing crafts when I overheard something a little boy said. Well, I saw my daddy bend my mommy over and spank her with a belt. That will teach her to bounce a check again. I saw the parents come pick up their kid later, and they seemed like such cliché white picket fence adults. I still don't know if the man was genuinely abusive or if they were in a BDSM relationship. Story 51. Not a babysitter, but nursery nurse here. We had this girl, say Mary, who went to the nursery, and during one of our open days, they came along. The dad wasn't too pleased with the mom, not sure if they were married because he thought she was cheating on him, which she was, but it was the classics. He wouldn't do that. She's not the type to conversation, followed obviously by the breakup due to the affair. The mom then gets together with the lady she was sleeping with, and they recently got married. However, the mom had a younger child with dad, a little boy who clearly has issues, who, when in the 2-3 room, and after the dad left and mom 2.0 joined the scene, would constantly ask for dad. We would casually ask at pick things like how they got on just because he asked about him. Mom and mom 2.0 would always get really uptight and weird about it. They're also a really odd match. Not that it matters, but no one would ever put them together ever. Mom 2.0 is good with the kids, but is socially not great. Story 52. The kid found her mom's sex toy and put it in her mouth. This isn't really dark, but kind of weird and hilarious. Okay, so I was babysitting this one kid. She was 3 years old at their house. We were just watching TV and suddenly noticed that it was time to fix her some supper. While I was trying to look for some food to feed her, the kid suddenly went out of her parents' bedroom laughing. So I was like, "What's so funny?" and turned around to look at her. When I turned around, I saw her playing with a pink sex toy. Before I could take it away from her, she put it in her mouth. I suddenly grabbed it from her and just laughed out loud. She laughed too. I never told the parents, but they probably found out because I didn't put it where the kid found it. I should have kept a closer eye on her. Story 53. I babysat once for one of the moms from our daycare. She had a 6-yo daughter and a 14-mo. The 6-yo's bio dad wasn't allowed to come to the daycare because of child assault and predatory charges. But this was from 5 years ago, so he was out and newly acquainted into the community. I watched them 7:10 p.m. one night, and mom texted me she wouldn't be home till later, but her new boyfriend would pay me when he got home at 10:30 or so. Turns out new boyfriend was actually just the dad who had the charges on his name. He offered me a beer. I declined and left ASAP without being paid. Story 54. One family I babysat for was super big in the art world, super successful, had multiple homes/mansions/fancy cars, but the kids were weird. Specifically, the older girl, who was about 8, showed me a jar of baby mice that she had cut out of a pregnant mouse's stomach suspended in formaldehyde sitting on the windowsill in the kitchen. Something about that just did not sit right, and that was the last time I babysat for them. Story 55. Not a deep dark secret, but as someone with 15+ year in childcare, it's pretty common for a lot of wealthy parents to prioritize their jobs and themselves over their kids. Kids can sense this and usually develop some sort of unhealthy way to get more attention. The response is usually to throw money at the problem instead of genuinely getting the kid help or re-examining their family structure. It's always so deeply sad to me. A few families I have worked for, I genuinely wondered why they had kids. I understand parents need a break and people have to work, but man, it was so sad. Story 56. Babysat for a neighbor back in 1997 or so. 4/5 years old little boy, bit bratty but not too bad. His mom was a bartender that also loved bingo. So I worked every Friday, Saturday night and just spent the night there, sleeping on the couch and such. I woke up one morning to the mom watching adult film with her son. I groggily said, "What's that?" And she nonchalantly said, "Oh, it's just film." I told her that it was gross and went back to sleep, knowing that not much was going to happen because of lack of proof. I didn't report it. If I would have known that CPS in that area was anything decent, I would have reported it. Story 57. My mom once told me that she used to babysit one of her teacher's kids when she was in high school. I don't know what led up to this, but she caught his kids watching an adult film. That, the only part I remember her telling me, and that she took the tape out and the kids were confused. She said she didn't want to confront the teacher about it because it was too awkward of a topic. And yeah, I don't babysit though. I don't like kids. Last time I babysat someone that wasn't my little sister, I almost lost my crap. This little girl kept Summer salting around the house and almost hit her head after I told her to stop. Then she did hit her head and I was just angry. Story 58. I was giving the 4-year-old a bath and he asked me, "Why don't you touch me like Dad does?" That was my first red flag. Eventually, the dad would show up at home unannounced to just hang out with me when the kids were napping. I was 18. One day he got a vasectomy and told me if I wanted, he could send a couple blank shots at me. A few days later, he full-on assaulted me. I locked myself in the bedroom and called his wife. She wouldn't believe me. I called my brother and he rushed over with a baseball bat. Story 59. Babysat for the same lady for a CPL years, ages 13, 15. She was recently separated, new set of pubes, still young, late 20s. Trust fund baby, sweet-ass ride, and paid me very well. Here's just a few gems. Being nosy, found she had lighters made up with nude pics of her overlaid on them. Oh yay. And she was an exotic dancer for fun, did not need the money. Her dad, wealthy-ass ducker, was paying her friends for sexual favors. She didn't know. Found out because he propositioned me a $100 to feel me up and said all her friends do more for less, and caught her ex climbing in the window more than once. Talked him down enough to just leave. Job paid so good I put up with the weird dad, ex, crazy friends, and unruly lil craps. That I loved. Story 60. This is so late, but this is seriously so crazy I tell it every chance I get, even just to justify to myself that this really happened. I babysat for a couple while I was in high school who had 3 boys. I'd stay late and fall asleep on the couch. Once I was awoken to the sounds of moans and skin slaps. That night, the mom drove me home with a Navy guy in the front seat. We stopped at 7-Eleven, and she dropped him off first. They were very cool. I didn't get a lot of driving practice, and a lot of times the dad would let me drive home, very late, so no traffic. Was wonderful. And they gave me an extra $100 for Christmas. The kids were fun and sweet, too. I let them draw on all the walls with chalk and then clean when they went to bed. Story 61. When I was 18, I worked at an engineering firm. One of the head engineers asked if I'd like to babysit. Of course I said yeah, because he was VP. So I would watch them for a few hours, take them wherever they wanted, all on the parents' Amex. It was a sweet gig. I would get paid the same no matter if it was an hour or 4. The dad was hot, and they would come home drunk with usually another couple, and I'd see him grope the other guy's wife. I left because I found a new job. He was arrested shortly after. Turns out he was kidnapping girls from different states and pimping them out, as well as abusing them himself. Story 62. I babysat for this one family only a couple of times when I was 16, but on the first night, they just casually talked about how I needed to call the police if the kid's bio dad turned up at the house. I was then told I would need to barricade us all in their master bathroom and I should call them and their lawyer. Custody battles suck. Story 63. When I was 18, I used to babysit for a couple in their early 30s. At one point, they asked if I was interested in a threesome, which I politely declined. Also realized eventually that they had me babysit sometimes so they could do met. They told me so after offering me some, which I also politely refused. I guess they were being responsible. Story 64. Not me, but my babysitter. She regularly babysat for a little boy. He was about 2 and the parents refused to help with anything. She had to do everything. The parents were still home when she babysat, but always were in the office. Once when she was looking for something, she found a bong. Many weird incidents have made her come to the conclusion that they sell substances. Weird. Story 65. I babysat for the best kids, best temperament, and had great manners, both 3 and 5. Their mom is kind, and I have no qualms with her, but I decided to snoop because I was 15 and bored. I found her bathroom covered in substances and sex toys in her drawer. No judging for me, I was just insanely surprised. She had the 2 biggest bongs I've ever seen. Story 66. Mom would go cross-country for work, and Dad wouldn't come home till 2 or 3 a.m. Mom hired private eye to spy on husband. Drawers, yes, multiple drawers, full of prescription pills. No clue what they were, but for the most part, it looked like painkillers. This was all just the tip of the iceberg. Didn't last long with that family. Look absolutely perfect from the outside, but I've been a nanny for almost 15 years, and they were the worst. Story 67. This doesn't count, but I'm sharing it anyway. I babysat and dog sat for my neighbor sometimes. She stopped giving me jobs because I charged too much, even though she was the one who decided how much to pay, and hired this girl who was younger than me to sit instead. Turns out this girl was molesting the kid. But the mom saved $1 an hour, so I guess it was fine. Story 68. I babysat when I was 13 for this nice woman. She looked like she was in her early 30s. It was always come home, eat snack, do homework, take bath, read story, and bed. One night, I put them to bed early and went to watch TV in the guest room. I put in a DVD, and it started playing the mom's 18-plus videos. I just sat there like, what the heck? So yeah, she turned out to be a mother who made adult film. Story 69. Man. I started babysitting at age 12. I full-on babysat for a good 10 years. I have no good stories. Nothing. Nada. Zip. Just boring normal babysitting stuff. Nothing cool happened. Story 70. I'm a babysitter for an autistic kid and his little sister. Their parents are divorced, so I only know the mother, and both the kid talk about how they rather be with their dad. It turns out their mom abuses them and beats them every morning out of stress. Story 71. Knowing some of the siblings of the kids I babysat were being abused. I was too, so I didn't know what to do. I'm still terrified of authorities because of the fear drilled into me growing up, but I hate myself as an adult for not saying anything. I was afraid, but some of those kids suffered because I did nothing. Story 72. I've seen them only a couple times now. We've met a lot of CP's reports BC of how they act, forlorn and desolate, and how they dress, always dirty and the same thing for many days. But alas, nothing has arisen yet. Story 73. My employer was a very nice divorced mom of 5. I had learned from other family members that her ex had tried to kill her and abused her verbally and emotionally throughout their relationship. The kids all had massive emotional trauma from it and behavioral issues. Very sad. Story 74. Not too bad. In fact, a hopeful outlook. But I found a few Alcoholics Anonymous books on the kitchen counter flipped upside so no one would see. It was the dad's handwriting in the books, so I hope he's at least doing better. Story 75. Work at a school, but here you go. Most of the parents seem pretty normal. Several parents of students grow W'd, and at least one couple is involved in swingers parties. The kids don't know any of this, but I found out accidentally for most of them.